A quiet town, a woman rebuilding her life, a man who refused to let go, and a night that would end in bloodshed. Ayanna Collins had finally found happiness. After years of heartbreak, she was moving on, with a man who made her feel safe again. But behind closed doors, someone was watching, waiting. And in just a few hours, everything she fought for would be ripped away. March 15th. It happened fast. The evening started like any other. A door forced open. A home-cooked confrontation
meal,
laughter
laughter
at the dinner table, gunshots,
the warmth of a
chaos,
fresh
start, silence.
But across town,
by the time the police arrived,
boiling over.
It was too late.
Julius
Two
Warren
lives
wasn't
gone,
ready to move
and the man
on.
responsible, he wasn't willing
Nowhere
to be replaced.
found.
And before
For the
the night
officers
was standing
over,
over the
two
bodies,
people would pay
one
the price
thing was
for his
clear.
obsession.
This was no random crime. This was personal. A crime fueled by rage, by betrayal, by the kind of love that doesn't fade, the kind that kills. But the horror didn't end there, because Julius Warren had vanished into the night, and the hunt for a killer had only just begun. Where did he go? What was his next move? And how had no one seen this coming? This is the story of a woman who tried to escape, a man who refused to let her go, and a love that turned into something deadly. Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you speechless. A home is supposed to be a place of comfort, a place of peace, but for Ayanna Collins, home had been a battlefield. For years she had lived under the weight of a marriage her ex-husband wasn't. A marriage that left no room for freedom, patient, for happiness. A man who didn't just love Ayanna, but respected her. Ayanna had finally broken who she truly was. She had reclaimed her life, built a future someone to be proud of, and most for the first time in years, she had found Ayanna was happy. Really happy. She was moving on. She was healing, and she was completely unaware that someone was watching. Julius Warren had spent 20 years as a devoted husband, Julius, a provider, was a man of routine, a man who worked with his hands, kept his head down by trade. But if anyone had looked closer, but what happens when the thing that's broken, they would have seen is you. The way his hands clenched when Ayanna's name was mentioned, would always belong to you. The way his expression darkened whenever he saw her with someone else, and, most importantly, the way he refused to accept that she was gone. Because in Julius's mind, Ayanna wasn't gone. She was his. She had always been his. And if she thought she could just walk away, she was wrong. Maplewood wasn't the kind of place where things like this happened. Was that a storm was already raging beneath the surface. Where front porches were decorated with late-night drives Julius took past Ayanna's house, where kids rode their bikes until the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Where neighbors waved to one another as they didn't hear the way his voice cracked with resentment whenever he spoke about her. Or at least, they didn't know about the threats, the warnings, the nights Ayanna lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had truly escaped him, or if he was still there, lurking in the shadows just beyond her reach. And then there was Julius. This wasn't just another man. This was a Julius Warren, a trespasser. They had never met, a man who had taken what was his, never shaken hands. Julius wasn't about to let that slide. But from the moment Terrence entered Ayanna's life of Maplewood, he had unknowingly she was supposed to realize her mistake, to see that no other man could love her the way he did. She was supposed to walk through that door and made up his mind. I made a mistake. And once he made up his mind, there was no turning back. She was out there. The first 911 call came in at exactly 9:47 p.m. Falling in love with someone else, out for a late-night smoke, heard the gunshots first. Then the silence. Then panic. Shots fired. 2 people down. I think they're dead. In a matter of minutes, Maplewood police arrived at the quiet suburban home of Ayanna Collins. Flashing red and blue lights flooded the street, reflecting off windows and parked cars. A once peaceful neighborhood now gripped by fear. Officers moved in fast, guns drawn. The front door left slightly open, creaked as it swung wider. Inside, a scene that no amount of training could prepare them for. Ayanna Collins lay lifeless on the dining room floor, her body still warm. A pool of blood spread beneath her, soaking into the rug. A single gunshot wound to the chest. Her expression, frozen in terror. Eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Just a few feet away, slumped against a toppled chair, was Terrence Hughes. His fingers twitched slightly before they fell still. A bullet had torn through his torso. His hand, smeared with blood, had been reaching toward Ayanna. His last conscious act. their dinner table still set, candles flickering, a meal left untouched, a perfect evening destroyed in an instant. 2 lives lost, and the man responsible? Already gone. Detectives were on the scene within the hour. The investigation had officially begun. Right away, something stood out. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no kicked-in doors, which meant one thing. Julius Warren had walked right in, comfortable, familiar. He had been here before. But this wasn't a robbery. Nothing was taken. No valuables missing, no struggle, no screams. This wasn't random. This was personal. Witnesses quickly came forward. Neighbors, shaken and horrified, recalled seeing a dark blue sedan circling the block earlier that evening, the same car many had seen parked nearby in the weeks leading up to the murders. It didn't take long for detectives to connect the dots. Julius Warren hadn't just snapped. He had been planning this. Next, detectives turned to Ayana's phone, and what they found left no doubt about Julius's motive. Dozens of messages, each one more threatening than the last. You think you can just replace me? If I can't have you, no one will. You're making a mistake, Ayana. This isn't over. A pattern emerged. Julius had been watching, stalking, waiting for the perfect moment. Every message, every call she ignored only fueled his anger. And the final message, sent just 1 hour before the shooting: enjoy your last night with him. But digital evidence wasn't the only thing detectives uncovered. Security footage from a neighbor's home caught something even more damning. At exactly 9:32 p.m., a hooded figure stood motionless outside Ayana's house, hands in his pockets, watching, waiting. Then, movement. He stepped forward, disappeared through the front door. Another camera, further down the street, captured a car speeding away at 9:50 p.m. A dark blue sedan, a license plate partially visible, registered to Julius Warren. Detectives now had a timeline, a motive, a suspect. But there was one problem. Julius was gone. No phone activity, no credit card usage, no social media updates. He had disappeared, as if he had planned for this moment. But detectives knew one thing. Men like Julius Warren don't just vanish, they run. And when they run, they leave traces. A warrant was issued immediately. Patrol cars flooded highways, airports were notified, and bus stations were checked. But Julius had a head start, and the longer he was out there, the more dangerous he became. The manhunt had officially begun. Julius Warren had vanished. But detectives weren't far behind. They started with the obvious: his family, his friends, anyone who might know where he had gone. But one thing quickly became clear. Julius hadn't just run, he had disappeared with purpose. Every lead turned up empty. His apartment was abandoned, his phone had been turned off, and his bank accounts remained untouched. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist. Then came the breakthrough. Detectives pored over his financial records, looking for any sign of movement. Credit card transactions, ATM withdrawals, even gas station purchases, anything that could tell them where he was heading. But instead, they found something far more disturbing. A gun store, a purchase made just days before the murders, a 9mm handgun, the same caliber as the bullets found at the crime scene. This changed everything. Up until this moment, investigators had considered the possibility that Julius had acted on impulse, that he had shown up at Ayana's house angry, lost control, and committed a crime of passion. But this was different. This meant he had planned it. This meant he had always intended to kill her. And it wasn't just the gun purchase that proved it. As they dug deeper into his past, disturbing patterns began to emerge. Patterns that painted a much darker picture of the man Ayana had once loved. His ex-girlfriends, his co-workers, even people who barely knew him all seemed to echo the same sentiment. Julius was obsessive. Julius was possessive. And when things didn't go his way, Julius could be dangerous. One former girlfriend, who had dated Julius nearly a decade before, recalled an eerie encounter that had haunted her for years. "I broke up with him because he was controlling," she told detectives. "He would show up unannounced, call me constantly. It didn't matter how many times I told him it was over, he just wouldn't accept it." Then she hesitated. "And then, one night, I woke up to find him standing in my bedroom." Detectives exchanged uneasy glances. "I have no idea how he got in. I never heard the door open, but he was just standing there, staring at me." She never reported it, she was too scared. And eventually Julius moved on, or so she thought. Now, Ayanna Collins was dead, and it was becoming clear that Julius had never really changed. Investigators traced his movements in the weeks leading up to the murder, and what they found confirmed their worst fears. Julius hadn't just bought a gun. He had been watching Ayanna. Security cameras outside her workplace showed his car parked across the street for hours. He wasn't there to talk, he wasn't there to reconcile. He was waiting, watching, studying her routine. A week before the shooting, a neighbor had spotted him outside Ayanna's house late at night, standing there, motionless, staring up at her bedroom window. When detectives executed a search warrant on his apartment, they found something that made their blood run cold. A notebook, torn pages, scribbled notes, and on one of those pages, written in all capital letters, 6 words: "She can't love him if she's dead." This wasn't rage, this wasn't loss of control, this was cold, calculated, premeditated. Julius Warren had been planning this for weeks. And then, another discovery. Buried under stacks of unpaid bills and old mail, detectives found a printed one-way bus ticket. Destination? Mexico. Julius hadn't just planned the murders, he had planned his escape. But there was just one problem. By the time detectives made this discovery, he was already gone. The manhunt for Julius Warren had just become a race against time. With every passing hour, the chances of finding him grew smaller. Authorities sent out bulletins, contacted bus stations, checked border crossings, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. Then, a break. A call came in from a small roadside diner in Oklahoma. The manager had seen the news. He recognized the face. A man had been there just hours earlier, eating alone, keeping to himself, but what stood out was his behavior. He was jumpy, constantly looking over his shoulder. And when he left, he paid in cash. No credit card, no trace. Detectives rushed to review security footage. There he was, Julius Warren. The footage showed him leaving in a rusted blue sedan. The plates were stolen. He was running. Every law enforcement agency in the region was put on high alert. Roadblocks were set up. Officers searched bus stations, gas stations, anywhere he might try to hide. And then, just outside Amarillo, Texas, police spotted the car. A high-speed chase ensued, with Julius weaving in and out of traffic, desperate to escape. But there was nowhere left to run. The chase ended in a dramatic crash. Julius plowed into a ditch, the car flipping onto its side. Officers surrounded the wreckage, guns drawn. For a moment, there was silence. Then, movement. Julius crawled from the wreckage, battered, bloody, but still very much alive. And in that moment, all the rage, all the hate, all the obsession that had driven him to this point, it was gone. Now, he was just a man in handcuffs, a man facing the rest of his life behind bars. But for Ayanna Collins and Terrence Hughes, it was too late. 2 lives lost, a tragedy that never had to happen, and a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who refuse to let go. Julius Warren had been running for 2 days. 2 days of looking over his shoulder, 2 days of avoiding highways, ducking into alleyways, sleeping in his car when exhaustion finally got the best of him, 2 days of knowing, deep down, that the law would catch up to him, but still clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could slip away. But the walls were closing in. His face was everywhere. News stations ran his mugshot on a loop. Social media exploded with outrage. Crime Stoppers had put out a massive reward for any information leading to his arrest. And the people who once considered him a friend, they weren't picking up his calls. Julius had nowhere left to turn, So, in a desperate last move, he drove to Cincinnati, just far enough from Maplewood to disappear for a little while longer. He knew an old friend there, someone who owed him a favor, a man from his past who might not ask too many questions. But what Julius didn't know was that the friend had already made a call. By the time SWAT arrived at the small, decaying house on the outskirts of the city, Julius had no idea they were coming, no idea that within minutes, his 2 days of freedom would come to a violent end. Officers surrounded the house, moving in silently, weapons drawn. They expected a fight. They expected a man who had already killed 2 people to be ready to kill again. But instead, Julius stepped outside. His hands were shaking, his face was pale, and for the first time in his life, the man who had spent years trying to control everything had no control at all. He surrendered without a word. The man who had sworn he would never let Ayanna go, the man who had watched her from the shadows, who had vowed that no one else could have her, who had taken 2 lives in a fit of rage, now sat in the back of a police cruiser, staring blankly out the window. The people of Maplewood could finally breathe again. But the damage had already been done. The trial of Julius Warren became one of the most watched in Ohio's history. Courtrooms were packed, news outlets covered every second, true crime enthusiasts dissected every piece of evidence, every testimony, every small detail that painted the picture of a man who had lost himself in obsession. The prosecution didn't have to dig far to prove premeditation, because Julius had left behind a trail of evidence that was impossible to ignore. A notebook discovered in his car detailed his thoughts in the weeks leading up to the murders. Page after page of anger, plans, fantasies of revenge. The messages he had sent to Ayanna, threatening, insisting she was making a mistake, begging her to come back, then, within the same breath, telling her she would regret it if she didn't. Security footage showed him circling her neighborhood hours before the attack, and then, the most damning piece of all, the gun. Julius had purchased it just days before the crime. Despite his history of domestic violence, despite the restraining order Ayanna had filed, despite every warning sign that something terrible was coming, he had still managed to get his hands on a weapon, and he had used it. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They didn't need more time. Guilty. The sentence was swift. Life in prison without the possibility of parole, no second chances, no appeals that could change his fate. Julius Warren would spend the rest of his days in a cell. But for the families of Ayanna Collins and Terrence Hughes, justice didn't bring closure. Because no court ruling, no prison sentence, could bring back the lives that were stolen. Ayanna's children, 2 young boys, would grow up without their mother. Terrence's family would forever feel the absence of the man who had dedicated his life to saving others. And Maplewood, the quiet, peaceful town where neighbors used to leave their doors unlocked? It was different now. The people who had once trusted that nothing bad could happen in their community had been proven wrong, and they would never make that mistake again. But something remarkable happened in the wake of the tragedy. Ayanna's friends and family refused to let her story fade into another statistic. They turned their grief into action. They spoke out. They held vigils. They formed organizations to raise awareness about domestic violence. Because Ayanna never got the chance to escape. But maybe, just maybe, someone else still could. Maybe someone watching this right now is seeing the signs. Maybe someone in a dangerous relationship, someone making excuses for their partner's temper, someone ignoring their gut feeling, will hear this story and realize this could happen to anyone, and the only way to survive is to leave before it's too late. Ayanna and Terrence's story should have been one of new beginnings, of hope, of 2 people finding happiness after hardship, but instead it became a tragic reminder of how love, when poisoned by obsession, can turn deadly. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate act of rage, a final, brutal attempt to control a woman who had already broken free, and for that, 2 lives were stolen. Ayanna Collins, a devoted mother, a compassionate nurse, a woman who had spent her life caring for others, never got the future she deserved. Terrence Hughes, a man dedicated to saving lives, never saw the threat that was coming for him until it was too late. They were two people who simply wanted to be happy, and they paid for it with their lives. But their story doesn't end here. Because Ayana's voice may have been silenced, but her message lives on. She had tried to move on. She had done everything right. She left an unhealthy relationship. She put up boundaries. She tried to rebuild. And yet, she was still taken. Because sometimes, the greatest dangers don't come from the shadows. They don't come from strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes, the real danger is standing right in front of you. It's the person who says they love you but watches your every move. It's the person who won't take no for an answer. It's the person who smiles in front of others but seethes with anger when no one's watching. This story isn't just about Ayana and Terrence. It's about control. It's about obsession. It's about the warning signs so many people ignore until it's too late. And maybe, just maybe, hearing their story will make someone out there recognize those same signs in their own life and leave before the ending is written in blood. Now, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this case? Did you see the warning signs? Could this tragedy have been prevented? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another deep dive into the most gripping true crime cases. Stay aware, stay informed, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones closest to us.